What's up everybody, Chuck here. I have some decisions to make, and I'm hoping that you can help me make them. Part of setting up Morgan Media wedding videography was to come up with a plan and come up with a style that would kind of set us apart from everybody else. And I know that's kind of hard because a lot of wedding videos they all kind of look the same in a lot of ways. They all have a certain look and a certain feel, but each channel, each videographer that I subscribe to on YouTube, they do have their own thing. There is something that sets them apart from each other. And you could probably line them all up and I can probably tell you, well, this one is Film Strong, this one is 4LC Studios, this one is wedding film school stuff, this one is the Harringtons, this one is White and Reverie. And so, but what is Morgan Media's thing? What are we going to be known for? What's, like I said, what's going to set us apart? Why are brides going to choose us versus somebody else? So over the last couple months, I've been coming up with that plan. What is our style going to be? And then buying the necessary equipment to make that style happen. And so this is kind of where I need your help. Now, this is not the equipment video. I'm not going to go over everything that we've bought, because there's still some pieces I'm putting together, and this decision is one of the big ones. Let me explain. Part of what I wanted Morgan Media to have, or something I wanted Morgan Media to have, was some sort of glide cam or gimbal work in our videos. Now I know that's nothing that's, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. Quite frankly, everybody does it, whether it's like I said, like a glide cam or some kind of gimbal. And I didn't want something like a Ronin M or a Moza, something like that that's the big bulky thing. So I wanted something smaller, something that would be easier to operate, something that I can just put down and hop back onto a monopod or a tripod or what have you. So I settled on a Zhiyun crane. Zhiyun, is that what it's called? Zhiyun? Because we are just getting started and we have a plan in place. I have a budget I'm gonna stick to. And I'm not gonna tell you what that budget is just now, because I wanna make sure I stick to that budget. I don't want anyone else holding me to it but myself and my wife. That being said, a lot of what we're buying is off Amazon or eBay, used stuff. I'm not buying a whole lot of new things, and this is included. I bought the Zhiyun crane. This is the first generation one, and it cost right around 200 bucks. I think I got a pretty good deal on it from what I found on eBay, what they're kind of going for, even though eBay is very deceptive because a lot of it's buy it now type stuff, and a lot of auction things, you don't really notice what they're selling for unless you watch them. But anyway, so I got it for a little over $200. And the thing with these types of gimbals, and especially the first generation one like this, it wasn't meant for something like a Canon 70D that I'm shooting on now, or the cameras that we're going to be using as sort of our main workhorse cameras. Even though they did come out with a firmware update that allows them to hold heavier payloads like a Canon 5D Mark IV and other heavier DSLRs. However, their motors, when they were designed, weren't really meant for that kind of weight. So now, even though the computers are sort of compensating for that, it's still putting the motors, giving the motors a little bit more stress than what they were built for. This isn't some kind of technical discovery or anything I read. It's just sort of what I feel. Even though, yes, the firmware update enables the computers to tell the motor, hey, you have increased payload capacity, but at the end of the day, the motors were still only designed to handle a certain amount of weight. So even if the computers are telling you it can handle heavier payloads, the mechanics, the nuts and bolts weren't made to do that. That being said, I did update the firmware on this as soon as I got it. I threw my 70D on it, and I took it for a little test drive, and now granted I didn't really calibrate it as precisely as probably I should have, and it did the job, but I still felt like it was still struggling a little bit to handle this camera, which is already kind of heavy. Even the cameras I got are just a little bit heavier and heavier lenses. So like right now I'm shooting on the Tamron 17-50 2.8, and it's a heavy lens. Now maybe if I put the kit lens on it that's, you know, made of plastic, it probably would handle that payload a little bit better. But ultimately, this 17-50 is the widest lens I have, and now I probably would buy something a little bit wider, like a 10-22 Canon or an 11-16 Tokina. But it's still a really heavy payload for this package. So ultimately, what does this mean? Well, my plan was to have 3 identical cameras during the wedding ceremony. That way, it doesn't matter what camera I use, they're all gonna have the same profiles, they're gonna all look the same, as long as I expose them correctly and they're in focus and all that kind of stuff. All the camera, you know, all the internals were the exact same, so they should all match in post, right? That's a pretty good plan, I thought. And then, like I said, I put this 70D on this gimbal, and even though it worked, I still felt like I was putting the gimbal with a lot of stress. It was smooth, but it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it was gonna be able to handle the heavier camera with the heavier lens, even though I've watched plenty of YouTube videos that says to the contrary. But sometimes I feel like those YouTube videos, while they're not necessarily lying, they bought this and they really, you know, they spend whatever the brand new, like the Crane 2 and the other ones, you know, they cost $400, $500, $600, and so they don't want to sit there and say wasted my money, haha. No, they're gonna sit there and I think they're gonna compensate and say, oh, the footage worked. But ultimately, it's like, yeah, it worked, but are you gonna have your crane in? Is it gonna last as long as if it was used like it was intended to be used? This is where the decision is made. I have decided that I am not gonna use 3 of the exact same cameras. I will have 2 cameras that are the exact same, and these are gonna be my workhorse cameras. These are gonna be the cameras that my wife and I are gonna use throughout the day for the bride prep, groom prep, everything throughout the wedding, the ceremony, the reception, what have you. And then I'm gonna have a 3rd camera that's gonna be solely dedicated to the Zhiyun crane. So here's where I can use the internet's sage advice. What should my 3rd camera, my dedicated gimbal camera be? And I thought I had a decision made, in all honesty. My 2 workhorse cameras are both Canons. Because I really love Canon. I know. It's like, if you're doing wedding videography, why aren't you, you should be using a Sony A7R II or a Panasonic G85 or the new G85S. And while I agree those are amazing cameras and I wish I could have those cameras, like I said, I have a budget that I'm really wanting to stick to. And unfortunately, that means that I can't go out and shell out 10 grand on not just cameras. You know, I need cameras, I need the gimbal, I have some equipment, right? Like ultimately, I could have just bought 2 new cameras so I can have my 3 camera setup that I want. And then, you know, I have 1 tripod. You know, I have some equipment, but I need a lot more to do wedding videography. I need 2 more tripods. I need lavalier microphones, which I don't have. I need more recorders, which I don't have. More batteries, memory cards, you know, just all this other stuff that I need to be able to have a successful wedding videography business. And so with all that being said, you know, if I were to sit there and get brand spanking new cameras and even used Sony A7S IIs are still selling for like $1,500. And so because and this is probably where it's my fault, because I wanted to have all matching cameras, you know, if I got 3 A7S IIs at $1,500, that's $4,500 in just cameras. My budget is like, that's more than my whole budget. So I needed to shop exclusively on eBay, and I needed to find deals on everything so that way I can sort of, work it so I can have everything I need for our very first wedding in May. And so anyway, I found some really good deals on Canon cameras. I really like the picture profile. I love the way the footage looks in Canon cameras. Now I know they have that stupid 30-minute time limit, record limit, whatever, But, you know, there's plans, there's ways my wife and I are going to get around that, and we're just going to have really good communication during the ceremony to get around that. So that doesn't bother me so much. But anyway, so back to the topic, the third camera, right? So my original plan was to have that third same Canon camera. Well, that being said, I was like, okay, well, because I want a dedicated gimbal camera, so therefore I want it to be mirrorless. I want a mirrorless camera because that's what the crane was meant for. It was meant for lighter payloads. It wasn't meant for full DSLRs, not full frame, just full heavy DSLRs. So I decided originally to get a Canon EOS M5, their flagship mirrorless camera, and I was set. My mind was set. You know, the only extra thing I would need to buy, I wouldn't need to buy new lenses. I wouldn't need anything else. The only thing I would need to buy different batteries, but the only other thing I would need to buy is that lens adapter that went from Canon mirrorless or EF lenses to the Canon mirrorless. That's the only thing I would need. And even though those were still like $150, that I was willing to make that sacrifice. So that way I have all Canon cameras. I have their mirrorless camera, so it'll be easier to match the colors in the footage. But I recently saw some reviews online, and while the reviews are generally good for the EOS M5, there were some videographers that did reviews for the M5, and they said the video footage, while it still has obviously 1080p and it shoots 60 frames a second in 1080p, it still was sort of murky. It wasn't like a clear, beautiful image that some of the other Canon cameras have, that the normal DSLRs have. That the M5, well, it takes really good photos, and even though it's essentially a Canon 80D on the inside, which like I said, I have the 70D, so I love the footage on the 70D, and that's kind of been universally praised. The footage quality on the 70D and the 80D are both really positive. You know, a lot of people talk really highly about the output from these cameras. And essentially because it's an M5, I'm like, well, it should match, right? And they said, well, it doesn't. It doesn't match. It's not as good as the Canon 80D, and it's just lacking in overall quality. And so therefore, it sort of took my plan and blew it to shreds. What do I do now? I don't know. Because I've seen some film, like I've seen footage shot on the M5, and it looks good. Like, when you compress it down for YouTube, it doesn't look all that much different than some of the other Canon cameras. But when I don't compress it, right, when I export my footage and I send it to the couple, is it gonna not look that great? Is there gonna be a noticeable dip in quality between our two main cameras and the dedicated gimbal camera? So, after doing some research, I've come up with 3 options. One option is still running ahead and getting the M5. That's still an option, and these are all relatively within the same price range on eBay used. And there's some new, but those are gray market cameras, and they're a little bit, like I said, I'm in a budget, so saying just, hey, why don't you get the G85, or hey, why don't you get a used A7S or A7R2 or whatever, it's not gonna work. I have a strict budget. I know how much I wanna spend on this camera. And to be honest, it's under $750. I know you're saying, whoa, that's not a whole lot of money. I know, but there's still plenty of really good cameras for $750 that are gonna put out some great quality, great looking footage. And there's even wedding cinematographers out there. Some of the big ones that I follow, they use some of these cameras. So anyway, here's the 3 cameras. A Sony A6300. Now, I thought about getting the A6500 because it's newer, but because it's newer, it's still over $1,000. Like, I found a couple that were like $899, but they're heavily used, and that's, like I said, that's over budget. I have a budget, I need to stick to it. So the Sony A6300 is one, and it shoots 4K, but I don't really care. 4K to me is a fad, and ultimately, you know, because my other 2 cameras do not shoot 4K, I'm gonna put it down to 1080p anyway, so then my 4K footage at 1080p is gonna look amazing compared to my 2 other cameras that don't shoot 4K and they're just normal 1080p. So I feel like there's gonna be a visible difference, so I'm just gonna shoot at 1080p. but it also shoots at 120 frames a second, which I think is amazing for gimbal work. I'm kind of excited to do that. But so, a Sony a6300. Of course, I need a lens adapter, or I can just get a Sony wide-angle lens, and that's my combo for the Zhiyun crane. The Harringtons, which is another wedding videography channel, I don't know if they still use it anymore, but they did. They used a a6300 with this gimbal and like their 16 millimeter Sony lens. It's like a 2.8 or whatever, and that's their dedicated gimbal setup. Only use it for gimbal work. My other option is a Panasonic G85. Also shoots 4K, don't care. But the quality on it, it's really good and still puts out a really good picture from what I can tell. The specs on it are really good. It's light. My concern is that it's the 4/3 sensor, and I don't really like 4/3 sensors. I prefer either full frame or the APS-C sensors. However, from what I've read and what I've seen online, the low light performance is still pretty good, even though it's 4/3. I would need an adapter as well. Or I just get a dedicated Panasonic lens, and Panasonic lenses, the 4/3 lenses, are actually pretty cheap compared to Canon and Sony lenses. So that's my decision. What do I do? Do I get the the Panasonic G85, the Sony a6300, or the Canon EOS M5? And if there's a fourth one that's within my budget of under $750, you can tell me about it and I'll consider it. But right now, those are my three options that through my research that I found that would work extremely well with this gimbal and with just one dedicated lens, a wide angle lens. It's a perfect setup to just put it on the gimbal, get my gimbal shots, get establishing shots of the chapel or wherever they're getting married, and some of like the footage of them walking around being in love, and then I can put it down, I can grab my other dedicated camera on the monopod or whatever, get some other shots, grab this again, get that, just get some really good shots. So anyway, that's where I need your help. What do I do? I don't know. What do I do? I don't know. Tell me what to do. Seriously though, I really would love some advice here on what my third camera should be that's solely dedicated to this. So if you have any advice, any options, any other options that I haven't considered, like I said, the budget needs to be under $750, or the price needs to be under $750. So anyway, I hope you guys can help. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and God bless.